Okay, so this is a little bit different for the channel. Over the weekend here, I finished the Chronicles of Nick Infinity, the first book in the Chronicles of Nick series by Sherrilyn Kenyon, or Sherrilyn McQueen. Now, this book is, 12 years old now. It came out in 2010. A little bit about the Chronicles of Nick is that it is sort of a spin-off of the Dark Hunter series created by Sherrilyn McQueen, and it follows the character of Nick Gautier. He is a side character in the Dark Hunters series. I believe I forget when his first appearance is in that, because I just started that series as well with Dark Lover, which is certainly an experience.
Kinky.
But this book is a young adult book, and we will get into that portion of it for sure. This is a young adult book that focuses on Nick Gautier, as I said, the main character of the series, and he starts out at 14 years old. So this is sort of a coming-of-age series as well, hence it being a young adult. I did like the book. I recommend it to people that like an urban fantasy, low fantasy type of series with a male main character. I really, really enjoyed it. Not to say that female readers would not like this book as well. I think they would, and I think that the female audience is the one that is targeted for Sherrilyn McQueen's main series in the Dark Hunter series. But this book right here is what we're going to talk about today, and I actually really, really liked it. I highly recommend. One last thing before we get into the actual review is I actually just want to talk about my hair. No, I want to talk about the page count. It's not a huge book. It's 464 pages, I believe, and the readability is actually really, really smooth. Getting into the actual story here, this book follows Nick Gautier. He's 14 years old. He lives in New Orleans, and zombies are basically taking over the quarter. I don't think you could get more New Orleans than that. And I know that Sherrilyn McQueen, Kenyon, whatever you want to call her, I'm pretty sure she's going by Sherrilyn McQueen now, since the majority of her books in New Orleans, so she's lived in this world for quite a while, and you can tell by the atmosphere. So let's get into the positives of the book first, and then we'll get into the negatives. Bear with me, guys. It's been a long time since I've done a review, so I'm probably going to be all over the place. And considering that this is my first review of a book on a new channel,
strap in.
The first thing that I want to talk about here with the positives is actually the action scenes and horror scenes by Sherrilyn. They are really, really well done. And that actually has to do with her writing style as well. She has the ability of just really painting a picture without really giving you that much detail. She gives detail, but it's not like the fabric of the clothes was worn. And she just has this ability to make you see exactly what she wants you to see. It's just super easy for her to just have you see exactly what's going on. And once the action starts happening, I'm down with it. She's really good at writing action, and she's really, really good at writing horror. I know that most of her series are fantasy, but I would love to see what she could do with just a horror book. I don't know if she's done just a horror book. I know that these would be considered probably, and even her Dark Hunter series would probably be considered a subgenre of horror fantasy, but I would love to see like a straight horror book written by Sherrilyn McQueen, because I think she could knock it out of the park. They're very creepy scenes. The atmosphere is super thick, especially with it being in New Orleans. They actually go past the mansion, the one that Nicolas Cage, he actually owned it. It was in the third season of American Horror Story. That's in this book. That scene in particular is extremely creepy. Any scene that involves the zombies, near the beginning of the book, I really enjoyed because they're really creepy scenes. They're more action-filled near the end. Continuing with positives, I loved the side characters. Mark was great. I really liked Bubba. Bubba was an awesome character. She's really good at just plopping characters in and just giving them these like little slight quirks to them that make them memorable. Especially Phil. Phil, the guy that does the driving for, I think it's Kyrian. He's a dark hunter, and he is also amazing. I love his character. He doesn't have a lot of time in this book. I know he has his own Dark Hunter series book out there that I would love to read. I think it's the third book in the series. As far as the main character goes, Nick, I liked him. Did I love him? No. But I did like him, and we were getting into why I didn't love him in the negatives. But pacing, I also really enjoyed until we get to the third act. That's another thing that I'm going to talk about in the negatives. And I really enjoyed just the friendships and connections with most of the characters. Not all of the characters. We will get into that in the negatives as well. I think you guys see a theme here. I really, really enjoyed this book, but we're just going to have to get into the negatives. So as I said, with the pacing, I really enjoyed the pacing until the third act, where it just gets nuts. It gets crazy with the last probably 75 to 50 pages of this book fly. And I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. I really like the first and second acts of this book. She really took her time. And when we got into the third act of the book,
everything seemed to just go like way too fast. Slow down. I want some more time with these characters.
And I feel like at one point that this book was a lot longer, and that it was edited down to, just get to the end so we could get to the next book. Just saying, I think it gets a little messy here at the end. And considering that this author has a lot of books under her belt, I don't know why that this book would become sloppy to me. The first two halves of the book, we have our scene breaks, and when a new character takes over. So you're in the new character's head, you see what's going on. In the first part of the book, we get some scenes with Nick. We get some scenes with Kyrian. We get a scene with Acheron. We get a scene with Cody, and they are broken up, so we know which character is actually there, which character we're following. And near the third act, or near the end of the second act, she's just going different paragraphs of different people, and we're all through their heads, and it gets really, really confusing here at the very end of this book. It just gets a little sloppy at the end here, but it's just too quick for me. I think the end of this book just flies way too fast. If there was another 100 pages in this book, I think I would have been a lot happier with it as a whole. Getting into the characters again, I like Nick. I do. I think he's a really solid character, and I think he will grow throughout this series. And she obviously knows Nick. She knows him. She wrote him in other series. But as a guy that was a 14-year-old, I don't think she quite nailed the 14-year-old. There's a lot of scenes where I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I've known 14-year-old boys. I've been a 14-year-old boy. We don't care if we get in trouble. We don't care. I understand the relationship with his mom, which is something that I actually want to talk about in the positive section, because I'm an only child. I grew up with my mom for basically the first 13 years of my life. And I do understand that. But him bending to absolutely everything she says and going along with it just doesn't ring out to me in this. I don't think that I would have done it. I think that he does it for plot purposes, which makes sense, but it just doesn't seem realistic. I hate to say this, another character actually has to force his hand later in the book. His mother, I like, but she can get pretty annoying. We do have a little bit of insta-love here, and she does kind of redeem it a little bit with the side story that we have with Cody. But there is insta-love, and it's a little jarring, especially during the third act. The third act of this book, honestly, is where I have most of my problems. And I think, honestly, if the book would have been longer, most of those issues would have been solved. It's almost with the writing style, is that this is a young adult book. He's 14 years old, but it reads down a little bit more. It reads a little bit more like a 12-year-old book or an 11-year-old book than a 14-year-old book. if you know what I mean. And not saying that that brings the score down a lot for this. I really enjoyed it, and I do recommend it, but I just had my issues. Another thing that I did really enjoy is we didn't really get to know who the main antagonist was, if you can even say that there really was a main antagonist in this book, until the very end. I didn't really have that character that I could cling on to and be like, oh, this is the guy that's going to be the one that we have to take down in the book. It doesn't really happen. They're with my phone again. But we don't really get that, big bad guy in this book. We do get the bad guy, and I think that will end up being the main series villain. Hopefully, I don't know, because I didn't read the other books to know this thing. I didn't read any of the other stuff to know, but there's just some small issues that I had there with the antagonists, where we didn't really find out who the villains were until the end. We didn't get enough of the villains, and we didn't really get enough of the main villain, if that is indeed the main villain. I'm trying not to spoil it for people that haven't read this book, but we'll get into my final thoughts. So with that said, positives and negatives, what did I think of Sherrilyn McQueen in her first book in the Chronicles of Nick series, Infinity? Am I excited to read Invincible? Yeah, I think so. Yes, with the issues that I had with it, and they may not even be issues to you. They might just be issues to me, or things that didn't just quite hit the way that she wanted them to with everybody. They didn't hit the way that she wanted them to with me, if that makes sense. It was a little insta-lovey at some points. I think that something might have happened. Maybe the book was a little longer at one point, and some things got cut that made the third act seem like it was a bit shorter and a little messier than she wanted it to be. I know that McQueen is a very capable writer with a very big bibliography and a bunch more books coming out. So I highly recommend the Chronicles of Nick. Actually, this is maybe the size that the book should have been. It's maybe a little bit smaller than that. Let's take out, yeah, maybe about that. Maybe that's about how big the first book should have been in the Chronicles of Nick series. But yes, I'm excited to read more. I highly recommend this book. I like that there is a series out there for the young male reader, other than the one that I'm writing. The first 8 books are done. The first book in this, I believe it's going to be a trilogy of series for Nick, are finished. So if you want to go buy the first one, you can burn through them pretty quick. If I wasn't writing, I think that I probably would have been done with this book about a week or two earlier than I actually was. But yeah, I think you guys would really enjoy it. It's fun. If you like, the southern, deep south, Louisiana, monsters and that kind of thing, I think you're really, really going to like the first book in the Chronicles of Nick series. So, with that said, let me give you guys a rating. And I haven't really decided what it's going to be, because I don't know how many reviews I'm actually going to do on the channel, whether it's going to be a star scale or out of 5 or whatever. But with the first book in the Chronicles of Nick series, I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 5. As I said, it's a capable story with some really good characters, a really good atmosphere, some really creepy scenes, some really good horror scenes, and I think that the farther this book series goes on, the stronger it's going to be. Alright, so that has been the first book review on the channel. I don't know if these are going to continue or not. If you like the video and you want to see more, especially since there's 8 books in this series, if you want to see more reviews on the channel, and if you want to see more reviews of the Chronicles of Nick series, let me know down in the comments down below, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. Son? Or girl? I don't know who's following this channel. I really don't. That's it from me, guys, before my throat gets completely dry. I gotta get back to writing. You guys have a good night.